Pierna derecha, directo al arco. ¡Golazo! ¡Golazo!
The world of football with a soccer perspective. This is Soccer Today with Duane, Rollins and Kevin Laramee, live on the Sports Podcasting Network.
Good day, good night, and welcome to Soccer Today for Monday, September 10th, 2018. Canada put on a beating on the U.S. Virgin Islands, but the question everyone wants to know to start the show, Duane, is how was the Aqua concert?
I'm a Barbie girl in a Barbie world. Yeah, no, it's pretty fun. Yes, I saw Aqua Wigfield. I saw Wigfield, which people might not even remember who Wigfield is, but her famous song was called Saturday Night.
Oh, it's Saturday Night.
I saw her you got it. Yeah, yeah. And I saw her on a Saturday night, so that was kind of fun. No, it was a good throwback evening, standing in the cold and on a beach, but fun times nonetheless. But
I want to know when Ace of Base comes to town, right? That's the one.
I'll be all over that.
I'll be all over that.
It's a beautiful life.
Don't turn around. And don't turn around. That was the mandate from the U.S. Virgin Islands playing against Canada at the IMG Academy on Saturday. This game, Duane, actually was yesterday. 8-0 for Canada. Canada scored 8 goals. This is the biggest win margin in the history of the Canadian men's national team.
The previous, they had won 7-0 twice prior, St. Martin's and the United States, actually. But the United States game was like in 1890 or something, so a little bit out of the way. So yes, new record there, but everyone is, you're either like, I don't know whether I should make the joke or not, but they should have just really put an own goal in at the end just to end it once and for all.
Just to get that score line. Yeah, just to get that score line. But Jonathan David cap-tied, and let's take a look quickly at the goal scorer for this game. There's a few good performances. Jonathan Osorio scored the first goal at the 6th minute. Lucas Cavallini the second goal at 8th minute. Jonathan David for his first Canadian men's national team goal ever at the 32nd, and he put the brace in at the 37th minute. Lucas Cavallini with his second of the game at the 44th minute, and it's halftime, and it's 5-0 Canada. Then the beginning of the second half, Junior Hoylett at the 50th minute scored. Then Kyle Larin with a brace at the 60th and 80th minute for the 8-0 scoreline. Jonathan David cap-tied for Canada.
Yeah, that's an important one. And someone made a joke. It was Martin Bailey made the joke that he's already 20% is on the way. I'm not sure. 25% of the way on the way to the all-time record for Canada leading scorers. Or someone asked me a question there in the middle of this because why not? Yeah, so that's what Canada is all about right now is all these goal scoring, and I think we're going to see a lot of goals, especially in these Nations League qualifiers, because I was talking to people before this, Kevin, that were nervous about this game, and I was trying to be nice about it, but you got to really evaluate this and take a step back if you're nervous about the U.S. Virgin Islands. This is arguably one of the worst teams in the world. This is why the Nations League is happening, is to give teams like this an opportunity to play regular games. They're going to play 6 games a year. It was the first time this team had played since 2016. So, that's both a nod to the fact that Canada did exactly what they were supposed to do. In the past, they might have struggled. They might have only won this game 3 or 4-0, but they were never going to lose it. And the fact that they could score 8 goals and kind of on a trot at the end, I think they probably took the foot off the gas in the last 20 minutes or so after they got the 8th goal. And you can kind of understand that. I mean, they're not in first place. They're in second place. Cuba won 11-0, so they're in first.
I was going to talk about it. I'm like, Cuba against, let me have it in front of me so I don't mistake. But Cuba beat Turks and Caicos 11-0. And other interesting scores, Jamaica 4, Cayman Islands 0. That's a normal score. Dominican Republic beat Bonaire 5-0. Canada 8-0 here. You got Belize beating Bahamas 4-0. French Guyana beating Anguilla 5-0. And St. Lucia beating Antigua and Barbados 3-0. So I guess I'm going to St. Lucia for my honeymoon.
There you go. I actually watched the it was the St. Martin game against Antigua, I want to say. I know it's 3-0 win that one, but it was that was an interesting one. And the one thing about this Nations League, and I kind of became a little addicted to it this weekend, the games aren't, obviously they are what they are. They're Caribbean nations for the most part, and sometimes playing each other, but they were kind of entertaining, some of the ones when they were evenly matched. And I think that's what the beauty of this Nation League is going to be, is you're going to have evenly matched games, which will allow the entertainment to shine, because some of these Caribbean nations play with a kind of jeu de vivre that we'd like to see at any rate. But the other thing I was making with this is when you're looking at nations around that St. Vincent's and the St. Martin's and those guys that have never been to a Gold Cup, there's a real brass ring to grab for in these short little sprints of a qualifying campaign. 4 games, and the top 10 teams are going to qualify for the World Cup next summer. And you get a result like St. Martin did, and suddenly you're in with a shout to go to the Gold Cup. And for a nation like that, as much as we kind of poo-poo the Gold Cup sometimes, not so much in Canada, but certainly in the United States and Mexico they do, for those nations, for those island nations, that's massive. That's a huge accomplishment for them. It's realistically the biggest accomplishment they could ever get to. And this is such a short sprint of a thing to get to it that it will offer an opportunity for a lot of these island nations. I can't wait for next month to roll around now, not just because I'll see the game live in Canada, but because of the overall situation around it. This is a fun competition already. I am sold. I'm 100% buying into this, even with the big score lines, because they'll go away. Once the classification's over, it'll be even contests again.
St. Kitts and Nevis beat Puerto Rico 1-0. That's a surprising result when you think about the history of soccer in Puerto Rico. Puerto Rico football has gone down a bit over the last few years. Too bad the Islanders aren't here anymore, because the Islanders were one of the teams that were really helping Puerto Rico football. But there's still 2 games today, and there's a few games there's one game on Tuesday, the game with Martinique and the British Virgin Islands had to be postponed, unfortunately. But today you have Haiti versus St. Martin's, you have Curacao versus Grenada, and on Tuesday you have St. Martin versus Guadeloupe. But you mentioned the score lines, and the format of this tournament really encourages teams to run up the score because of the classification process. Of course, a lot of teams will get wins, a lot of teams will get 4 wins, but depending on the amount of goals you score, you'll be classified higher or lower.
Yeah, no, precisely. Canada had to run the score. They couldn't have been like in nice Canadians and stop scoring. They had to get 8. And it puts them in a good spot because they did roll it. And I mean, this is the easiest round. This is Pot A versus Pot D in terms of the cross. It was Pot A versus Pot D, and Pot B versus C obviously was what this round is. And each round is going to be a little bit different. They were randomly drawn into the 4 pots depending on where they ranked going into this. And for those that don't know, Canada was the 2nd highest ranked team in the entire Nations League classification spot. So it's not like we are the giants of this in many ways. Jamaica was the only team ranked higher.
Yeah, we're the Goliath. And Jamaica only scored 4. So I guess that was a bit of a letdown for Jamaica versus Cayman Island. But for once, we're the Goliath. We're the giants. We're not used to this.
Yeah, and as I was saying last week, I mean, Canada had never really had a hiccup at this stage of qualifying before when you're talking about teams like this. And the U.S. Virgin Islands is not a team that Canada would even have ever seen before, because these guys used to get eliminated before they'd even get to the Canada coming into the qualifying process, and it showed. But, you kind of feel for those guys a little bit, and they reminded me of like a very good men's team you'd see in your local league. And I'm not saying that to be dismissive. That's just the reality of it. These were ranked amateurs. The highest level that any of them were playing was there was 2 players that were on the Dallas City of the 4th tier in the United States, and there was one player at Marshall University, which isn't even a particularly good university in terms of soccer. Obviously, they're famous for the football tragedy that happened there in the 70s, football. At any rate, it's not exactly the highest level of play that these guys were at, and did the job. You got to score the goals against them, and it's unfortunate that they have to, but this is the win-win of it is that they go through the old embarrassment here, but, down the line in a year from now, they'll be playing 6 games a year against the likes of the British Virgin Islands.
Yeah.
Also, U.S. Virgin Islands has only won 5 games all time, and 3 of them are against the British Virgin Islands, and I do hope they call that the Virgin Derby, but at any rate.
The Virgin Islands Derby. Come on. Who's going to win that one? That's a good one. But now looking forward, of course, this game is impressive. If you don't follow soccer, if you don't follow the Canadian men's national team that much, and you see the headlines like at TSN, Jay and Dan on Sports, and it was like, oh, it's going well for soccer in Canada. Hold your horses. Wait a minute. Wait just a minute. It's not that important of a win. But is there anything we can take away from this game that can be positive for the upcoming games?
They scored goals. As I said, they were never going to lose this game, but the fact that they scored 8 does prove to them that they can put the ball in the back of the net because, look, it's a stretch, but I'm sure that that's exactly what they said. I'm sure that was John Herdman's message at the headline. Do what we're supposed to be doing. Just treat this like a practice session, with a little higher intensity. Don't, at the end when we're up 8, I'm sure that they told them to rein it in a little bit to avoid, heat exhaustion and things like that because it was pretty hot down there. And they didn't want anyone hurt in a game like this. And thankfully, to U.S. Virgin Islands' credit, they weren't hacking out there. I mean, that's always a worry when you're playing a nation like that. They get frustrated and they're going to, they see a junior Hollette that's in the Premier League and they go, I've seen him on TV. I'm going to kick him now. Yeah, they didn't do that. So I think that they deserve some credit for that.
I'm going to double stud.
They scored goals. That's the positive.
Yeah, it is, and it's a good thing that nobody did any frustration moves like a kick or a double cleats sliding tackle to injure someone. That's always a positive. But there's maybe a bit of a competition brewing for the starter position as a forward. When we look at Jonathan David getting the start and getting his first cap for Canada, Kyle Larin coming off the bench, both players scored 2 goals. If you had to choose right now, who is the hottest striker between the two?
Well, that's the beauty of it. I mean, look, obviously Larin's at a higher level. Turkish league is ahead of the Belgian league. They're Dutch league, Belgian. Which league is he in? Anyway, sorry.
He's in the Belgian. Right now, he's in the Belgian Jupiter League, Ghent.
Yes, exactly. Sorry, for some reason I thought he might have been in the Dutch there for a second. Forgive me, it's Monday. But no, Kyle Larin's at a higher level. That is a higher level. Although the Belgian league is a decent level. I mean, we've seen successful players come from there. Two MLS teams have taken players from both Canada, both the Impact and Toronto have had good luck bringing guys in from the Belgian league. So obviously it's a decent level, but. I think that whoever's hotter is the one. Cavallini, to me, you pen him in. He's brilliant. I think he's our best player right now in terms of a forward. Even I put him a little bit higher level than Davies even at this point, just because he's older. So he's in there all the time. But in terms of the other two, whoever's hotter, and that's a nice problem to have, though. You can even put all 3 out if you wanted, I suppose. But I don't know what formation they were playing against the U.S. Virgin Islands. It looked like they had 2 at the back.
2-5-3 or something.
Yeah, they basically just go forward, just go and have a half-court game. At any rate, but no, it's a nice problem to have. I still think that Kyle Larin, if he can get some confidence in Turkey, I think that because the service is going to be better, assumedly, with this new group of players and this new cycle, I do think that he has a chance to really be dominant out there, particularly in CONCACAF because of his strength. So, I do like the idea of putting him right there, but it's when has Canada had these options? I mean, I can't remember. Maybe when Bunbury and Pescasolido were sort of crossing over a little bit, but that's...
Even then, it was a totally different type of options.
Yeah, it's also 25 years ago, right? So it's been a long time ago.
Well, look at
it's their second 90s reference of the day.
Yeah, exactly. For me, when I look at the age of those options, too, look at the core of this team. We have Samuel Piet, defensive midfield core, and Scott Arfield, captain now, new minted captain of the Canadian men's national team. They're still pretty young. Like Samuel Piet, we think he's so old because he's been playing for the national team since he's 17 years old, but he's, 24? So he's still very young. And we have Alphonso Davies, 17 freaking years old. Jonathan David, 18 years old. Lucas Cavallini, early 20s. You have a lot of options here. Kyle Larin, mid-20s. A lot of players that are still young in the sunrise of their career. The prime of their career is coming, and they're all rising together. We don't have bits and pieces, a few different generations. We have one generation rising together, surrounded by a mix of well-played Canadian men's national team veteran, Premier League veterans, and other players that, for me, makes a mix that, 2022 doesn't seem out of the question anymore, just because of the rise of all of them together. And I guess outside of the 8-0 result, that's what I find satisfying with this team, is the confidence and the lack of PTSD of the last 20 years of Canadian soccer that's just growing up together.
No, precisely. And look, I think they talk a lot about 2022, and I do believe that is their goal. It should be their goal. It should be the goal of any national team is to qualify for any World Cup, and regardless of the past, regardless of anything else. But just that said, I do think there is also an eye to 26 being put for this team, and they're maybe going to be willing to go a little bit younger than they might have otherwise earlier with that eye to 2026. Then you're almost, I'd say, 98% likely to be at that World Cup. So I do think that there is a lot of hope for 2022. I've been thinking that for a while. They do have to find some people at the back. Obviously, we talked about that on Friday with Don, and if you haven't listened to that interview, I do encourage you to go back and listen to it, because it is, I think, one of our better ones, ironically, coming from a non-Canadian in terms of the Canadian national team interview. So go back and listen to that on a Friday. It's in our archives. There is excitement to be had here, and there's a complete fresh start, and that's, I think, one of the big things. Obviously, there are a couple holdovers. Junior Halab, but he came in late last cycle, so we're not talking 8-1. Like, there's no one left from there, right? No one.
Dero,
if he were to come back for the Gold Cup next year, then he'd be the only one left from that. Yeah. And that's good. That's good for the mentality of the team.
It is. And we'll see, you mentioned the back line. We'll see who's 18 and 19 years old right now doing well as a good defender. Maybe we'll get a few of them in the future. But to finish on Canada and the Canadian men's national team and the CONCACAF champion and the Nations League, it is important for the other nations, but it is important as well for this coaching staff with John Herdman, with the transition. This was like the first real camp, and everything we heard so far from Scott Arfeld to other players in this camp is, organizationally speaking, the training sessions, organized, well-run, with a clear purpose. Those are the comments we want to hear. We're not saying we're convinced yet, but I'm saying it's the right direction right now. If you got to play like you train, and if you're well organized, if your training sessions are not there to waste time, if you're actually working on tactics, working on ways to get this team gelled quickly, because let's face it, that's what a national team is to find a way to get those players and a team aspect to create that chemistry in a very quick time period. If Herdman can do that really quickly, this is going to be a fun ride.
Yeah, look, he's a sports scientist in many ways. It's for as much as he's a coach, he's as much about the sports science and about the organization and all that sort of stuff. That has always been John Herdman's strength. My worry with him in the women, his switch from the women's side to the men's side, is that some of his motivational tactics might not play as well. I think that Scott Arfield was named the captain, and a lot of people made a big deal of that. So I think that there is something there that's more than just who gets to wear the armband in terms of that. I think that they're quite purposeful in the fact that they named him the captain, in the sense that it's a guy that has played at the highest level. He's played at the Premier League. He's played professionally. He's the exact type of player that skeptics of a women's coach coming over to coach in the men's game might think he'd have trouble reaching. So I do think that there was something beyond just he's a veteran player that was named to that. I think it was, we want a guy that's on side with me and is going to work with me and sort of bridge that gap that John Herdman does lack in terms of he never played the game at the higher level. And that does matter to some of those players. That you never played the game stuff, that's always in their back pocket if they have an issue with you, whether you're a journalist, whether you're a coach, whether you're whatever, right? So to have a guy in your camp and making him your captain and making him part of the leadership committee for this team, I think was a smart move, and I think it was quite purposeful that they did that. I mean, there's some people that thought that maybe it should have been, I don't know, Zario or someone else there, but I think that was a smart move because Arfield is the exact type of player that they need to win over in this transition.
And to finish the show, Duane, today, we wanted to touch again a bit on the Ottawa situation, talking about Canada and Canadian players. What can you tell us more about the Ottawa staying in USL situation?
All right. Well, there's been this sort of this has been a not a very well-kept secret in Canadian soccer over the past week or so. I'm not sure how well it's known amongst fans that are listening in that, but it was the Julian factor in terms of this decision to switch. And sometimes when you hear a lot of thunder, you might expect some rain, so to speak. So I'm willing to sort of say what people are saying behind closed doors out front right now in terms of Julian de Guzman's role in the decision to not move forward towards a Canadian Premier League berth. And quite bluntly, it's been said to me by multiple people, and I'm not talking 2 or 3, I'm talking 7 or 8, that Julian de Guzman was the biggest voice against the Canadian Premier League in terms of these, that he was not only discouraging Ottawa from joining this, but we've been told that he's discouraging other players that he knows from coming over to this league. So this is a problem, regardless of what side of the debate over the Ottawa situation that you're on, whether you're pro-Fury and think that they, should quote unquote protect their own interests, or whether you're, a complete nationalist and think that they should be forced in. You've got to understand that the fact that Julian de Guzman is allegedly telling players not to come is something that's not great for the league, and that they need to figure out a way to either convince guys like that, convince these veterans or retired players from the national team to encourage people, or I don't know, like you got to figure, or just go, or find some way to undermine them so that that their message, whatever it is, unless there's something justified in it. Sure, that's something to talk about. But if they're just angry about something or frustrated about something, or if the partisanship is coming out in terms of his Fury stuff, then there's a problem there. And it's just unfortunate. I don't like to throw a guy like Julian de Guzman under the bus in terms of talking about this publicly, but it's getting talked about everywhere anyway. So what's the point hiding this anymore? This is the full disclosure of stuff we're hearing.
But to play devil's advocate for a second, Julian de Guzman might be onto something too, because look, September 10th, still no really player signings, right? There's tryouts happening. It's still late in the process for the beginning of the season. It was supposed to be spring 2019, 7 teams only. The launch of this league hasn't gone as smoothly as one would have anticipated or would have hoped. It's a tough launching of a league. It's not happening as easily. There was talk about more than 20, 30 people, ownership group approaching Canadian Premier League to have a franchise, and there's a lot of talk. So far, the walk, there's 7 who took the plunge. It's not necessarily as easygoing as the fans would have hoped so, probably as the Canadian Premier League themselves would have hoped so, and the response from players has been a bit more cold than anticipated. If you go back to Steven Sandor's anonymous survey, there's still a lot of questions, financial questions, the roster cap, which is the salary cap of the roster, the type of rules of the roster that you will have, the quota. There's a lot of unknowns still with this league. So if you're Julian de Guzman, the known versus the unknown, you kind of understand a bit why maybe he is doing this, if that's the case. But still, a project like this needs to be supported. It's not going to be perfect from the get-go. Eventually, it's going to transition. It's going to change, too. An idea and a league itself, on paper, is one thing. When you start it, you figure out things that work, things that you thought would work that might not work, and it's going to transition. I bet you, out of those 7 teams in a few years, there's 1 or 2 who's not going to be there anymore, replaced by another market who's going to do better. Those are the growing pains of a league, and I guess there's both sides to that debate.
Yeah, I'm going to tease a little bit of an interview that I did with Steven last week after this. Kevin, as you know, was a little under the weather last week, so we did an interview that was ready to go Friday in case he wasn't able to go, and we'll probably run it on Two Salties or in some capacity this week. He argues, Steven Sandor does, that the league actually is running more smoothly than the launches are running more smoothly than maybe people are thinking it is, and he's comparing it to past launches in the past, where not only were you having issues like this flare up, but you were having like teams literally fold before they played a game. We're not seeing stuff like that, and that's that's a small miracle, but it's sort of small praise, I guess. But it's something that he did say, and I'm not going to say anymore. But that'll let you listen to that, and for $2 a month you can get Patreon. On Patreon you can get the Two Salties podcast. You can get all these in-depth conversations in more detail. Look, the Canadian Premier League. One thing we've learned, one thing I've certainly learned over the past, what is it, coming on 5-6 years now of talking about this, is that they move at their own pace. They have never been beholden to the expectations or the desires of the fans in terms of rushing things to announcement. They have waited an extra year and a half from when we thought they were going to launch to when they were even told in some cases. I was told in some cases that they were ready to make an announcement, and then just months and months would pass, and people would get more and more frustrated. And I think it was going badly. And then eventually we got to the point that we are now. Yeah, there's no players signed. I mean, we probably think, Nick Ledgerwood and players like that are sort of probably wink signed, but nonetheless, we don't have many details in terms of that stuff. We have had one sort of conversation that got leaked that probably wasn't supposed to, in terms of a cap number, which was lower than many people want, but we haven't heard anything official. I do think that cap number is probably fairly accurate based on what I've been told. It is a launch cap with the idea that we're going to see how much money we can make off this, and then we'll address it after that. Is it going, was it ever going to go perfect? No. The Ottawa situation is a hit because I don't think it's a hit that we're losing Ottawa per se. It's a hit in terms of the optics of it. It looks bad. It looks bad because this is an established team that people expected to be in that isn't. And it particularly looks bad that they're choosing to play in not just an American League, but a second-tier American League, that they're thinking that's better. And it's one thing to have Montreal, Toronto, and Vancouver in MLS. And they're in MLS for the foreseeable future because Canadian Premier League is not going to be the level of MLS anytime soon, and it would be counterproductive for the Canadian Soccer Association, for anyone in Canadian soccer, to try and force those teams out for 10, 15, 20 years. So that's not going to happen. I'd take that off the table, but you expected that this would launch at the level of the USL, and I still think it's going to. But the perception and the optics of them not being involved in the launch, that's the problem. And that matters because that matters in terms of ticket sales. It matters in terms of buy-in from the general public, and we are starting to get that old, this is just going to fold in a year anyway, so why are we bothering to invest emotionally in it, come up again. And that's going to be a problem with this league in terms of whether it's real or not. I don't know, but it's going to be an optics problem in this league for probably 4, 5, 6 years before people are willing to believe that it's long-lasting. Hell, it was a problem in MLS until probably 10 years.
10 years ago, yeah.
Probably about 2006 or so when people stopped making those it's going to fold comments.
Yeah, and, as I was mentioning earlier, there's probably going to be one franchise that starts and eventually is not necessarily going well, and it's going to move or it's going to change ownership, or as soon as that happens too in the Canadian Premier League, which happens in every single league, every single sport. So it's going to happen in the Canadian Premier League, and then those comments are going to surface again saying, oh, we knew it, we told you it's not going to be sustainable. It's a long-term project that's from the horse's mouth to begin with. They're in it for the long term. If you listen to David Clanachan's comments when he first was named commissioner, Paul Byrne, the president of the Canadian Premier League, when he was talking about it months ago, it's in it for the long term. So those things are going to happen. Those comments are going to come back up, and it's how we deal with them at that moment. You like the Canadian soccer talk? You like Duane and I talking about Canadian soccer with our networks of contacts as well, dropping in some time to time? Well, follow our Patreon exclusive show, Two Solitude Soccer Podcast, at patreon.com/sportspodcasting network. $2 a month will give you access to this exclusive show. Thank you very much to all the brand new patrons since last week. We appreciate you taking the plunge with us, and we hope you're more to join us in the next few days. For Duane Rollins, I'm Kevin Laramee. You can follow Duane on social media at 24th Minute. You can follow me at Kev Laramee. Hopefully my cold is going away soon. I really hope so. I need to go play soccer outside, and that's going to happen hopefully soon. And until tomorrow, as always, have a great soccer.
You can find the podcast version of all the shows we do on iTunes, Apple Podcast, Google Play Store, TuneIn Radio, iHeartRadio, and anywhere you get your podcast.